I recently did a video speculating on the future of Breitling, that they might be looking to distance themselves still further from Solida ETA, potentially bring in some sort of manufacturer or in-house movement for their basic three-handers. As is my wont, when you guys give me really good comments and make me think about different things, I often follow those videos up with a part 2 or a follow-up. This is what this is. So for those of you who haven't seen this before or don't know what I'm talking about, suggest you might want to see my previous video first, then come back, and here what I'm doing is taking the comments that you guys gave me and then running with those, answering questions, going in different directions, and just generally having some fun. This video turned out to be way longer than it should have been, but you know what? I enjoyed it. I can't be bothered cutting it down. There's nothing I want to leave out. So strap yourselves in for a long one, and I'll see you at the other end. Bye. Okay, so let's get into my responses to your comments to my video talking about speculating on the future of Breitling. Now, I'll start with Michael Riera, who says that he's unsure about moving away from ETA movements, as he's a huge fan of the reliability and easy maintenance. You know what? So am I. I'm definitely in two minds about this. Like you, I love the easy maintenance and reliability and dependability and high performance. That should never be forgotten of Solida and ETA movements. But the truth is, form follows fiction. If Breitling wants to maintain this instruments for professionals ideal, if also they want to increase in price, maintaining this fiction is so much easier if you've got something like METAS certification behind you. I think that is really it for me. Breitling moving forward, I'm not sure can sustain its idea of who it is and where it sits in the market without that METAS certification, and I don't think they're going to get that as long as they're with Solida or ETA base movements in so many of their watches. Michael then goes on to talk about he'd like to see some smaller watches like the size of his Colt 41 and more three-handers. I totally agree. In fact, the kind of dearth of those core three-handers is one of the things that inspired me to really speculate on the future of Breitling and how it seems to be that they seem to be emptying the stocks, getting ready for something new. They have introduced some smaller watches pretty much everywhere, but definitely not in the Avenger line, which is really remarkable given that the Avenger was supposed to replace the Colt, or not only replace the Colt, but take over its area as the entry into the brand. That the Avenger comes in at smaller size of 43 and that has not been updated at all since the introduction of this brand tells me something is coming soon. Tells me this is the watch which is going to get released next. Michael then goes on to talk about wanting to see an upgrade in the clasp, etc., etc. I agree with you here, not because I give a rat's ass about bracelets and bands. I don't. I see them as solely accessories, but I just want the noise to stop. My life gets better if more people stop talking about bracelets so much and we can get back to talking about the things that matter. For that reason, I would like to see an upgrade in bracelets and clasps and whatever other accessories you guys care about. There was, as you can probably hear from my tone, a lot more comments around bracelets and clasps and wouldn't we like them to be updated. There was one that really caught me though. There was a comment or a question comment from Marcus where he spoke about, why is it that these big brands can't seem to make their clasps, etc. better when a brand like Monta can make adjustable classes on watches under 2K. I found myself, my first response was to say, well, Monta don't make anything. Monta source everything. And then from that, I began to think maybe there's an answer to Marcus's question in there. Because you see, the truth is companies, big companies, real watchmakers like Tudor and Breitling and Omega and all these guys, they make stuff. And that means that they have investments in infrastructure and machining and inventory and all that sort of stuff. And as a result, that's hard for them to change on a dime. For little brands like Monta that don't make anything, it's actually really easy. You know, go to some Chinese factory, ask for 500 Scooby-Doos. They make 500 Scooby-Doos for you. And then when you want to make the Scooby-Doo Mark II, you just find a new factory that makes a slightly better one and, you know, kick the dust from your feet and move on. When you're a company like Breitling or Tudor or Omega or those guys, it's much harder for you to do that. Curiously, Marcus does make the point that that in a different video, he made the point that Breitling's bands, the clasps on those bands, are a fair bit better than the ones on their bracelets. Interestingly, Breitling make their bracelets but don't make their bands. And maybe that's, again, that kind of fed into my idea about why you might see the people that make things actually struggling to sometimes match the people that just source stuff. Howard Gum agrees with me that he would love to see Breitling embrace METAS certification. Yay! And he says he'd like to see them compete better against Omega, Rolex and Tudor. Totally agree, except as I spoke about in a previous video, I don't think Tudor's in the same league except for some of their absolute top-end stuff. So across the board, I don't see them really as a benchmark that Breitling would even concern themselves with. Okay, Alfonso asked 3 questions or made 3 statements in one, and I'm going to address them all here. First, asked that the aerospace not be discontinued. I think the aerospace is totally safe. All of the Quartz movement, Breitling has invested an enormous amount in their Quartz movement technology center and their ability to take bare bones Quartz movements and then work on them, create new electronics for them, put them in their own watches. And I don't think they're going to give that up. So I do think you're going to see watches like the Endurance and the Aerospace stay. You've asked for a solar-powered aerospace. For the same reason, as I said in one, I think you're unlikely to see solar happening. They probably don't have the in-house technology or money to develop that, and they probably don't want to go outside of the company to get that technology and probably risk their Swiss madiness. So I think solar is unlikely to occur. Okay, so Scott C would like to see Breitling come out with a chronograph that's 40 millimeters in diameter, 47 millimeters lug to lug, and 13 millimeters thick. Well, mate, they have. The B09 is exactly those measurements. Okay, maybe a little bit out on the lug to lug by about 0.5 millimeter, but apart from that, they've made it for you. The AVI 765 also comes pretty close. It's a little bit, it's a 41 millimeter, but on the other hand, it's only 11 millimeters thick. So frankly, mate, Breitling have already given you 2 watches. Okay, Wesley agrees with me on the Chronoworks, thinks it's the only one they made that's the only one that they made was a watchmaking masterpiece. I half agree with you. The movement was a masterpiece, probably a decade ahead of its time. The watch itself was pig dog ugly, and I can see why they didn't proceed with it. I don't think I even put a picture of it on my video, but I would love to see that technology move forward. Well, you've also said something interesting that you'd like to see them trim down their Solita and ETA models and maybe not make so many models. Wesley, I think you need to go look at the actual Breitling catalogue. There's actually very few watches in it now. It has been trimmed right down to the bare bones. Okay, Z11 Breach asks the question, any predictions for the professional line? Unfortunately, no, other than I think it is safe for all the reasons I said to Alfonso. Breitling's investment in those super quartz technologies and their ability to work with, program, repurpose those means that I think they're extremely unlikely to give those up. I do agree with you, it doesn't seem to get much love, but then on the other hand, they're in the middle of a massive overhaul, and it was possibly the least broken of some of their lines, so I can see why they didn't. You say that it's a shame because for you it's the only line that really stands out. Well, look, to each his own. I think it's for me, it's difficult to understand how you can look at some of the watches in that catalogue now and say nothing else stands out. But like I say, to each his own. George and Time Lord both made the point that they'd like to see a new Super Ocean and that they really preferred the dials of the previous versions. For me, the last version was okay, but it certainly didn't seem to grab enough buyers. And frankly, if I look at them side by side, the old one was, well, old and busy and cluttered and has too much text on it. And a lot of that text is utterly unnecessary and just gets in the way. I far prefer the new, cleaner style. I think that it's much more modern. It's much more forward-looking. I think it promises to take the Super Ocean in a new direction. So, like I said to the previous caller, to each and his or her own, but I personally much prefer the new Super Ocean. Howard Myers, one of my favourite commentators because he gives me lots of things in the comments to dig into. Okay, so Howard's first real point is that he thinks that Breitling should forget about celebrity endorsers and rely on the intelligence of consumers. I think that there is no faster way to fail, go broke, crash and burn than to take that kind of advice. If you look at the marketing behavior of the biggest player in this space, you can see what it takes to succeed. It is rumored that Rolex, the king of the hill, the brand that doesn't need to advertise, spends up to 40% of its turnover on advertising and marketing. You might, as an insider, as an enthusiast, wish that wasn't the case, but the reality is we buy a tiny percentage of the watches that are sold, and this wall-to-wall marketing of equestrian events and golf and F1 and cinema and arts and architecture and all of that other stuff is essential in the 21st century. And to advocate giving that up is to advocate the death of the brand you want to support. Howard goes on to say that a sense of upgraded movements is a must. I sort of agree. I don't think it's a must, but as I said earlier, I think it certainly makes maintaining the fiction of who Breitling is a lot easier, and it certainly makes it easier to make the prices go up. Okay, and Howard's last question or last point is really around distribution needing to be controlled, problems with grey market dealing. And this comment is really interesting to me because it really highlights the great problem every watch company that has experienced some sort of problem has. See, what Howard's talking about here is really a problem of several years ago. This has largely been dealt with. Today, it is very difficult to get any current model currently on the Breitling website watch via any of the big grey dealers, Joe Machop, Chrononext, all of those people. They've got lots of older 3 or 4 year old stuff, lots of like Navitimer 8s, that watch that was on the market then released, lots of Transoceans, lots of Colts, all of the old stuff that's not in catalogue anymore. Sure, that's there. But the new stuff, very, very rare to see that in bulk on any grey dealers. And so I really do think that this is kind of yesterday's problem, but the market, as always, is taking a long time to figure that out. I did find myself thinking as I was responding to Howard here, is this the reason why Tudor, which was something of a basket case, decided to simply cut itself off from the West and retreat from the market, give up on it, vanish from our thoughts, and then come back years later, sort of with a clean slate? It's probably a brand only, it's probably a move someone only like Tudor could afford to do. And I did find myself with it thinking, is that why they did it? To create this break, to not have comments like Howard's making here arise around them. Okay, Stephen UK raised a couple of points in here. He'd like to see a three-hander diver with a date. I reckon there's every chance of that coming. With a power reserve indicator, no! They are horrible looking things that almost always detract from the dial. Pretty much the only person I've seen that does one of those I really like is Chopin, but I don't think the way they do it would fit with Breitling, so I don't want to see a power reserve indicator. I could cope with one on the back of the watch. There's something cool about a power reserve indicator on the rear, and a new chrono, mate, that is absolutely certain. You don't need to wait. Literally every 3 to 4 months, Breitling will give you a new chronograph. You can take that to the bank. Okay, Mark Wheeler asks a couple of questions which I'll probably not be able to answer. Do they have the ability to scale up production if Breitling did want to go in-house or manufacture? Mate, I really don't know. One thing I would say, though, is Breitling don't make a lot of watches. They're only making about 140 to 150,000 watches a year. So their numbers aren't huge. So the amount of scaling up, the amount of buy they would need to make isn't that great. And they could do something like a Tudor, pick a very small slither of what they want to do, and then go for MEDAS certification of that, and then roll it out across a number of years and a number of other collections. Mark asks the question, what in fact do we think is the capacity of Kenissi? For those of you who aren't aware, Kenissi is the movement manufacturer that is partly owned by Tudor and Chanel and makes all of the Tudor movements. Okay, so I reckon that the actual capacity of Kenissi is really low. This is my thinking. One, their primary user of their movements is the Tudor Black Bay, and they're pretty niche. They would be at most maybe 20,000 movements a year. You could throw in there would be the Breitling, which remember is only in one watch. That's probably only another maybe 5-ish thousand movements, maybe 10,000 movements. Its partner Chanel, the other people taking movements out of that watch, is also tiny. We're probably talking a couple of hundred to maybe a few thousand watches a year. And they also supply watches, but I believe only supply movements, but I can only think of 2 other people using these Kenissi movements, and they're Fortis and Norcane, and they're even smaller than Chanel, I suspect. So take all of that, roll it together, come up with an answer. My guess is that the capacity for Kenissi movement manufacture is probably, as I say, really low. 30 to 50,000 movements, maybe max. Mark finally asks the question, can Breitling justify the expense of everything required to go up to METAS? I don't know. That's a $1 million question. It could be a couple of $1 million question. That's why I do tend to think some kind of manufacture movement in cooperation with someone else who they could share a lot of the load with is always possible. Could this be an extension of the Breitling Tudor Kenissi partnership? That is very likely. Those 2 companies do kind of go in different directions. Breitling being more of a chrono specialist and bringing in some more and more complications. Tudor probably not going down the complications route, probably sticking pretty solidly to its 3-handers. So maybe they see that they don't really compete with each other now or for the foreseeable future. So possibly there is an expansion of Kenissi coming. I don't know. Really quick one. Joachim Carlson asks for a 48mm Avenger with 3 hands and an in-house movement. Good luck with that, mate. I think it's got a snowball's chance in hell of getting up. Okay, so I've saved my longest response till last, Marcus. It's not personal. You just happened to be the first person that answered, that gave a comment I'm responding to, and because I work backwards, you go last. Sorry about that. So the first thing he says is it's clearly noticeable Swiss watches are getting exported in smaller numbers but higher in price. Yeah, we've all discussed that. I think it's inevitable. I think every brand is going to want to move up in some way, and as you and I have spoken about via these comments before, I totally agree. You go on to say that you don't believe Breitling will develop their own three-hand movement, but anyone's guess is valid here. Hey, look, you just heard my response to someone else. I can sense change. I can sense movement. I can see a business case for both, but I can't put my hand on my heart and say that Breitling is going to develop a three-hand movement or whether they're going to go manufacture. I think it's going to be one of those two. I'm totally on the fence. I think it's more likely to be a manufacture movement. I'm going to jump around a little bit here. You say that you would like to have a Super Ocean 4244 with ceramic bezel and on-the-fly clasp. I'm not going to bother talking about the clasp thing. I've already done that. I actually hope we don't get the ceramic bezel on a steel watch. I think that was going to result in what I call a Nicolas Cage watch. And that might be okay now, but I harbour grave fears for the way these watches are going to look in 5, 10, 15 years. I think it could be more than just a little bit disturbing. Marcus says, jumping back a little bit, that he'd like to see an endurance with a three-hand quartz movement and a less busy dial. I agree with all of that. I kind of like the new endurance chrono, but I agree it is too busy. It does remind me actually of the last generation of Super Ocean that I didn't like. I think there's too much going on. I agree. I would love a three-handed quartz super quartz endurance. I'd love to get rid of the compass bezel. I really don't like compass bezels. And sorry, Marcus, maybe not a simple three-hander. Maybe we can also give it a GMT. How would that be? Marcus says he would like to see a Super Ocean 42 with a GMT movement, not the hilarious, gigantic Avenger 45 GMT. I'm torn on this one because I quite like the 45. I think it's a good sized watch. I've got one and love it to bits, and I don't want mine any smaller. However, I do note that people like smaller watches, and I would love to see Breitling bring out a 40 as well. I wouldn't buy it, but I think it would be good for the brand to do so. I do feel compelled, though, to point out that this is another one of those cases where people comment about catalogs without checking the catalog, because the thing is, Breitling do have a smaller dive-capable GMT watch. The Avenger automatic comes in a 43 for the GMT as well. And then if you compare the sizes between, say, the Breitling and the Tudor GMT, you'll see that they're remarkably close. So again, whilst as much as I agree with Marcus that I think Breitling could do with bringing out some smaller cases, I feel compelled to point out that there are in fact watches smaller than he's noting already available. Next up, Marcus makes the point that he'd like to see something like the old Colt, but with a less ugly bezel from 2020, not the 1990s. My immediate reaction to that was, why be dull? And in fact, this has led me to do a whole other video not as a response, but sort of following on from this idea that Marcus has done about how brands sometimes choose to maintain a signature move or a signature look, even though there's segments of the market that don't like it very much. All of which brings me to Marcus's last point and the last thing I talk about on this video. This last point that Marcus raises, really just talking about pricing, essentially saying Breitling watches are too expensive and I can always buy something else for the same price. It was that idea, and Marcus, by the way, is highly representative of a huge segment of this community. It's that concept of price comparison that led me to create the archetype of the accountant when I was talking about watch prices. And on one level, I can see the logic of what Marcus and everyone else that makes similar comments. I can see the rationale behind it, but I can't feel it. My response to this is really, it's difficult for me to really deep down share this feeling. Because my first answer is, well, if you want the Zenith or the automatic chrono, then buy it. What are we having this discussion for if you can afford the new Zenith and that's what you want? What's the point of the comment? But if, on the other hand, what you're really saying is, I actually, of those three watches, which I can afford all of them, I want the AVI 765, but I'm not going to buy it because I know I can buy watches I don't want for the same price. To me, that sounds insane. I don't understand why you would not buy a watch you like and you can afford because you could buy watches you don't like for the same price. I can't see how those two sides of the equation add up. And that same idea sort of plays into that last sentence where you'd say generally with current pricing, you'd go for the Tudor, Bike Bay 41 or the Chrono instead of a Breitling. And my response is, so buy the Tudor. If you like the Tudor more than the Breitling and it's cheaper, well then buy it. And what are we having this conversation for? But again, it sounds like what you're saying is you'd actually prefer the look of the Breitling, but because the Tudor, the watch you don't want as much, is cheaper, you won't buy the watch you do want, even though you could afford it. And again, I'm stuck in this, I don't understand. Although maybe I do understand, and this is something I was thinking about with the accountant archetype. Maybe one of the problems with the accountant is they actually do care about the look. They actually do care about the aesthetics, but they can't price it. They can't figure out what's the dollar value I put on simple desirability. I can put a dollar value on Power Reserve. I can put a dollar value on Metas. I can put a dollar value on in-house. But how do I put a dollar value on this watch just looks better? And I think that concept that people struggle to put a value on simple beauty is one of the reasons why we have so much flipping going on. Because people rationalize themselves into buying watches that they don't really love, but makes sense because, you know what, I could get this watch at the same price with better specs than the watch which I secretly really wanted. And then later on, funny, what a surprise, I end up flipping it because I never really bonded with the watch I never really wanted anyway, but the accountant in me says was the smart buy. So I'm sorry if that came across as me attacking you, Marcus. I really didn't mean that. You're very much representing, frankly, the vast bulk of the watch community. So it wasn't personal at all. You just happened to be the one who made the comment today. So that was it. Lots more speculation, lots more ideas about where things were going. I can't thank you guys enough yet again for watching the previous video and then leaving me comments that I could make me think about what else could be out there, other directions that where things could go. Yeah, this show quite literally would not happen without you. So thank you again. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave comments below, but as always, I never do a follow-up to a follow-up or a part 3, but I might come back to those still in a couple of months, in a year or two, when hopefully maybe this is washed through and we've seen whether I was clever and saw the future or whether I was completely wrong and fundamentally misread the market. Both of those are equally likely, I suspect. Anyway, I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches, and I'll see you later. Bye.